The disciple who truly understands his master is the one who learns to disobey him. There's a moment in every spiritual journey that nobody talks about. The moment when following the teachings perfectly becomes the very thing blocking your transformation. You've been the devoted student, absorbing every word, executing every technique flawlessly, building your practice brick by brick, and your master watches, silent, knowing that all this dedication is just another form of hiding. This is the paradox nobody warns you about. The path that's supposed to free you can become the very thing that traps you. The teachings that illuminate can also blind. The discipline that shapes you can also cage you. What if the moment you stop trying to be a good student is the moment you actually start learning? What if rebellion isn't the opposite of devotion, but its deepest form? What if unlearning your master is the only way to honor what he truly tried to teach you? This video is about the disciple who had to unlearn his master to finally understand him. It's about the courage it takes to disobey, the pain that comes from letting go of certainty, and the strange freedom that emerges when you stop performing enlightenment and start living it. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right but something still feels wrong, if you've been the perfect student but can't shake the feeling you're missing the point, this is for you. There's a particular kind of blindness that comes with early knowledge. The disciple stands before his master, mind filled with concepts, techniques memorized, philosophies repeated like mantras. He believes he's learning, but what he's actually doing is building a temple around his own reflection. Eastern philosophy calls this the beginning of suffering. Not because ignorance exists, but because the illusion of knowing has taken root. The ego wears humility to hide in fear, wrapping itself in the robes of studentship while secretly measuring its distance from the teacher. It's the mind's favorite trick to seek validation through obedience, to collect teachings like trophies, to mistake information for transformation. The disciple bows, yes, but inside, he's already imagining the day he won't need to. Shadow work begins here, in this hidden pride, though he doesn't see it yet. He watches his master move through the dojo with effortless flow, each gesture a demonstration of Wu Wei, and he thinks, one day I'll move like that. What he doesn't understand is that his master isn't moving toward anything. There's no arrival in Zanshin's movements, no destination encoded in the strike. The sword cuts, the wind passes, the river flows. These things don't practice being themselves. But the disciple practices, and in that practice, he's separated himself from the very thing he's trying to become. Mindfulness, he's been told, is the path. So he becomes mindful of his mindfulness, aware of his awareness, watching himself watch. The mind-body connection fractures under the weight of observation. He's standing in the temple, but he's forgotten how to breathe. The master sees this, of course. Zanshin has witnessed this pattern countless times. The student who arrives hungry for enlightenment through pain, seeking spiritual transformation like it's a prize to be won. There's a specific kind of suffering that comes from wanting to transcend suffering. It's the koan nobody wants to sit with. You can't think your way out of thinking. The disciple studies Buddhism and Taoism, reads about detachment and impermanence, nods thoughtfully when samsara and nirvana are mentioned. He meditates on non-attachment while being deeply attached to the idea of becoming non-attached. It's almost beautiful, this recursion. Almost. The psychology of pain is simple. We create it by resisting what is. But the ego dissolution he seeks can't happen while the ego is the one seeking it. So the master watches, says nothing, and lets the disciple continue building his prison out of borrowed wisdom. The technique is perfect, yet the heart is tense. This is the paradox the disciple lives inside but can't name. He executes each form with precision. His body remembers what his mind was taught. But there's a rigidity in the perfection, a holding, a fear of making the wrong move. He's learned to perform Zanshin, to mimic the stillness, to strike with calculated spontaneity. And every time he does, he feels further from the truth. Emotional pain surfaces in strange moments, after a flawless demonstration, in the silence following praise. He tells himself it's discipline, this ache. He tells himself suffering and awakening are married, that trauma healing requires endurance. What he doesn't tell himself is that he's terrified of being seen as he actually is, uncertain, incomplete, still learning. So he hides behind the mask of the good student, the one who understands, who's almost there. But almost there is the furthest place from here. The master gives a teaching, and the disciple thinks he receives it. When discipline becomes attachment, Zanshin says, learning turns into a cage. The words hang in the air like incense smoke. The disciple nods, writes it down internally, adds it to his collection. He'll think about this later, apply it, integrate it into his practice. He doesn't notice that he's already missed the point. Self-awareness, he believes, is something you develop. Inner stillness is something you achieve. Karma and rebirth are concepts to study. But the master isn't speaking in concepts. He's pointing at the mirror, and the disciple is so busy analyzing the frame that he doesn't see his own face reflected back. Somewhere beneath the knowledge, beneath the pride that masquerades as humility, something stirs, an unnamed discomfort, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't understand anything at all. The disciple doesn't just admire his master, he needs him. There's a difference, subtle but vast, like the space between breathing and holding your breath. Zanshin moves through the world with a presence that feels unshakable, and the disciple interprets this as something he must obtain. He sees in the master the reflection of one's own limitation, though he'd never phrase it that way. What he thinks he sees is perfection. What he's actually seeing is his own hunger projected onto another human being. Eastern philosophy warns about this, the tendency to make gods out of teachers, to place them on pedestals so high that you never have to face yourself. It's safer that way. If the master holds all the answers, then the disciple can remain the question. If Zanshin embodies enlightenment, then the student can stay comfortable in his seeking. Admiration turns into inner confrontation without anyone noticing.
Shadow work would ask, what are you avoiding by worshipping? But the disciple doesn't ask this. Instead, he studies Zanshin's every gesture, cataloging mannerisms, speech patterns, philosophical positions. He practices Zen philosophy as if it's a language to master rather than a silence to inhabit. When the master speaks of Wu Wei, the disciple hears technique. When Zanshin demonstrates effortless flow, the student sees effort, just better hidden.
This is the trap of spiritual transformation sought through imitation. You can copy the form, but you can't fake the emptiness that allows the form to exist. The mind-body connection the disciple seeks lives in integration, not replication. But he's built his entire practice on becoming someone else. And the more he succeeds at this imitation, the further he drifts from his own center. The psychology of pain operates here in a particularly cruel way. The disciple experiences emotional pain whenever he falls short of his imagined version of mastery. He strikes poorly, responds too quickly, allows frustration to show, and each failure feels like proof of his inadequacy. What he doesn't realize is that he's not measuring himself against Zanshin. He's measuring himself against his projection of Zanshin, an impossible standard built from his own insecurity. Let's say he's in the dojo, and another student asks him a question about meditation and suffering. He answers with something he heard the master say last week, repackaged in his own words. It sounds wise. It might even be helpful. But inside, he feels like a fraud, because he didn't answer from his own understanding. He answered from his collection of the master's understanding. This is the cage. This is how suffering and awakening become separated. When you seek awakening through someone else's eyes, Zanshin notices this projection, the weight of it. Good teachers always do. They feel themselves being turned into symbols, their humanity erased in favor of an idea. The master knows what's happening. The disciple is creating an authority figure to rebel against or submit to, and either path leads away from self-awareness. Buddhism teaches about attachment, and here the student is deeply attached to his image of the teacher. He's also attached to his image of himself as the devoted disciple, the one who truly understands, who's different from the others. There's a subtle arrogance in this devotion, a hidden pride in his own humility. When Zanshin speaks of impermanence and detachment, the disciple applies these concepts to everything except his relationship with the master. That remains sacred, untouchable, the one thing he's allowed to cling to. But impermanence doesn't make exceptions. The master begins to introduce small disruptions. He contradicts himself. He acts in ways that don't match the enlightened archetype. One day, Zanshin loses his temper over something trivial, a misplaced training sword. Another time, he admits uncertainty about a philosophical question. He tells a story about a mistake he made years ago, something petty and human. The disciple witnesses these moments and feels uncomfortable. These cracks in the mirror shouldn't exist. If the master is flawed, then what has he been following? If Zanshin isn't the embodiment of ego dissolution and inner stillness, then the entire structure wobbles. The student tries to rationalize these moments, tests perhaps, or demonstrations of some deeper teaching about non-attachment. But underneath the rationalization, something else is happening. The projection is beginning to fracture, and with it, the safe distance between teacher and student. The space where he could hide behind someone else's authority is shrinking, and the disciple doesn't yet know that this discomfort is the doorway. When discipline becomes attachment, the body remembers but the spirit forgets. The disciple has trained for years now, each day folding into the next like pages in a book he's read too many times. Wake before dawn, meditate, practice forms, study texts, repeat. There's comfort in this rhythm, a safety in knowing exactly what comes next. Wu Wei speaks of effortless flow, but what he's created is something else entirely. A fortress built from routine, walls made of repetition. He tells himself, this is the path, that mastery lives in consistency, that enlightenment through pain requires endurance. And maybe that was true once, in the beginning. But somewhere along the way, the practice stopped being a river and became a cage. The ritual without awareness, Eastern philosophy warns, is just another form of sleep. He's awake, going through the motions, but he hasn't truly been present in months. Shadow work lives in the places we refuse to examine, and the disciple refuses to examine his attachment to the very thing that was supposed to free him. He's become what Zanshin once described as the mechanical disciple, someone who performs the forms perfectly but has forgotten why they exist. Picture this, he's in the dojo, executing a sword sequence he's done 1,000 times. His body knows every angle, every breath, every transition. From the outside, it looks flawless, but inside, nothing. No mind-body connection, no presence. Just muscle memory running its program. This is what happens when mindfulness becomes another task on the checklist, when meditation and suffering are separated from lived experience. He sits in zazen not to observe his mind, but to prove he can sit longer than yesterday. He practices detachment while being completely attached to his identity as someone who practices detachment. The psychology of pain reveals itself slowly, like water wearing down stone. At first, the emotional pain is subtle, a vague dissatisfaction, a sense that something's missing. He attributes it to not practicing enough, not being disciplined enough, not understanding the teachings deeply enough. So he doubles down, More hours in meditation, more study of Taoism and Buddhism, more repetition of the same techniques. He reads about karma and rebirth, about samsara and nirvana, trying to locate himself on the map of spiritual transformation. Maybe he's in the dark night of the soul, that necessary suffering before awakening. Maybe this emptiness is actually progress. But the truth is simpler and harder. He's stuck. Not because he's doing something wrong, but because he's doing the same things so right that he's stopped questioning whether they're still serving him. The cage isn't made of bars. It's made of perfect form, repeated endlessly. Zanshin watches this crystallization, this hardening of the student into a statue of himself. The master has seen it before, the moment when learning turns into performance, when the disciple stops being curious and starts being correct. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes from getting exactly what you thought you wanted. The student wanted discipline, structure, a clear path. He got it, and now he's trapped by it, unable to see that the path was never meant to become a home. One afternoon, during practice, Zanshin stops mid-demonstration and asks, "Why do you strike?" The disciple answers immediately, reciting something about focus and precision and being present in the moment. The words are right. They're the words the master taught him, but they're dead words, borrowed language that has no roots in his actual experience. Zanshin nods, says nothing, and the silence that follows is heavier than any critique. In that silence, the disciple feels something crack, just slightly, just enough to let in a sliver of doubt. The technique is perfect, yet the heart is tense. He's heard this before, but now it lands differently. Now it feels like an accusation he can't defend against. That night, alone in his room, he goes through his practice again, trying to find the flaw, the mistake he's making. But there is no mistake in the execution. The flaw is deeper. It's in the attachment to execution itself. The belief that if he just performs correctly enough, something will shift. He's built his entire identity around being the good student, the dedicated one, the disciple who understands. And that identity has become another form of ego, dressed in the clothes of self-awareness and spiritual seeking. He thinks of inner stillness as something to achieve, non-attachment as a state to maintain, trauma healing as a process with a finish line. But what if there is no finish line? What if the whole framework he's been operating within is part of the problem? The question disturbs him, and he pushes it away. But it lingers, like smoke after the incense has burned out, waiting in the spaces between his perfectly executed forms. There's a moment when everything you've built reveals itself as paper. The disciple doesn't know this moment is coming. No one ever does. It arrives disguised as an ordinary day, another training session, the same dojo he's stood in 1,000 times. Zanshin calls him forward for a demonstration, something they've done countless times before. But today, something's different in the master's eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, something harder to name. The instruction is simple. Strike with full commitment, as if your life depends on it. The disciple bows, centers himself, draws his sword. He's done this movement so many times it lives in his bones. His form is impeccable, his focus sharp, his execution technically flawless. The sword cuts through the air with precision, and Zanshin moves, not away from the strike, but into it, past it, through the space where the disciple's awareness should have been but wasn't. The master's hand stops a breath from the student's throat. "You missed," Zanshin says quietly. "Not the target. You missed yourself." The words land like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward into everything the disciple thought he understood. Shadow work doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives in these quiet devastations, these moments when the mirror finally shows you what you've been avoiding. He wants to argue, to defend himself, to explain that his technique was perfect, that he did everything right. But the master's hand is still there, a hair's breadth from his throat, and the message is undeniable. All his training, all his discipline, all his years of practice couldn't prevent this. Not because he wasn't skilled enough, but because he wasn't present enough. Eastern philosophy speaks of the danger of living in the mind while the body moves. It's called the split, the fracture, the place where ego dissolution becomes impossible because the ego is too busy managing the performance. He struck at where he thought the master would be, not where Zanshin actually was. He fought his projection, his expectation, his collected knowledge of patterns. He fought everything except reality. The psychology of pain floods in now, not as theory, but as lived experience. Emotional pain isn't just sadness. It's the collapse of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. The disciple has defined himself by his dedication, his understanding, his closeness to mastery. And in one effortless movement, Zanshin has shown him that none of it matters if awareness isn't alive in the moment. This is what meditation and suffering actually teaches. Not that you can transcend pain through technique, but that pain is what happens when you're living anywhere except here. The mind-body connection he thought he'd developed was just the mind controlling the body, forcing it through memorized sequences while his actual attention was somewhere else, thinking about the next move, evaluating his performance, maintaining his image. Wu-wei, effortless flow isn't something you do, it's what remains when you stop doing, and he hasn't stopped. Not once, not ever. Zanshin sheathes his practice sword and sits, gesturing for the disciple to do the same. The dojo feels different now, the air charged with something the student can't name. You've been practicing detachment, the master says, but you're attached to practicing it. You've been studying impermanence while trying to make your understanding permanent. You meditate on non-attachment while clinging to the identity of someone who meditates. Each sentence is a strike, precise and unavoidable. The disciple feels something inside him begin to crack, not breaking yet, but fracturing, like ice under weight. This is the confrontation suffering and awakening demand, not with the master, but with every assumption you've built your practice upon. Maybe he's been approaching this wrong from the beginning. Maybe all his study of Taoism and Buddhism, all his efforts toward spiritual transformation, have been another form of control. Maybe self-awareness isn't something you develop through discipline. Maybe it's something you allow by releasing discipline. The thought is terrifying because it threatens everything he's worked for. The master continues, voice steady as stone. The technique is perfect, yet the heart is tense. Do you know why? The disciple doesn't answer. He can't, because answering would require admitting he doesn't know, and his entire identity is built on knowing. Because you're still trying to become, Zanshin says. Still trying to reach some future version of yourself that has achieved inner stillness, that embodies the teachings, that has completed trauma healing and ego dissolution. But there is no completion. There is no arrival. Karma and rebirth, samsara and nirvana, these aren't destinations. They're descriptions of what's already happening right now, in this moment you're too busy planning to actually inhabit. The words settle like dust after a collapse. The disciple sits there, sword across his lap, facing the ruins of his understanding. Everything he thought was bringing him closer to enlightenment through pain might have been taking him further away. Not because it was wrong, but because he was doing it for the wrong reasons, from the wrong place, with the wrong relationship to the whole endeavor. And beneath the shock, beneath the disorientation, something else stirs, something raw and real and utterly uncertain. True learning begins when obedience ends. The disciple doesn't sleep that night. He sits in his room, sword beside him, mind turning over Zanshin's words like stones in a river. Everything he's built, every routine, every practice, every carefully maintained discipline, suddenly feels like a shell he's been living inside. Shadow work whispers the question he's been avoiding. What if the very structure meant to free you has become your prison? Eastern philosophy calls this the sacred rebellion, though few teachers speak of it openly. There comes a moment when the student must do the unthinkable, not reject the teachings, but stop performing them. Stop trying to be good at them. Stop measuring himself against them. The psychology of pain here is sharp and clarifying. You can't transform while clinging to the identity of the one who's transforming. Ego dissolution doesn't happen through effort. It happens when effort finally exhausts itself and something else, something truer, is allowed to breathe. Morning comes, and he enters the dojo different. Not better, not worse, different. Zanshin is already there as always, but the disciple doesn't bow with the same automatic reverence. He bows because it's honest in this moment, not because it's expected. They begin practice, and for the first time in years, he doesn't execute the forms perfectly. He stumbles, he hesitates, he allows himself to not know what comes next. And in that not knowing, something opens. Wu Wei, effortless flow, isn't about perfect execution. It's about complete presence, even in imperfection, especially in imperfection. The mind-body connection he's been forcing starts to happen naturally, not through control, but through surrender. His strikes are less precise but more alive. His movements less calculated, but more responsive. Zanshin watches this unraveling with something that might be approval, might be recognition. The master knows. The real teaching begins when the student stops trying to learn. Over the following weeks, the disciple does something radical. He disobeys. Not rebelliously, not with arrogance, but with awareness. When Zanshin teaches about detachment, the student allows himself to feel attachment and observe it without shame. When the master speaks of mindfulness, the disciple notices his mind wandering and doesn't force it back. He reads less about Buddhism and Taoism and starts actually sitting with the questions instead of collecting answers. Meditation and suffering are no longer separate practices. They're the same thing, the willingness to be with what is rather than what should be. This isn't abandoning the path, it's finally walking it. Think of it like this. He spent years trying to build a perfect temple, brick by brick, following the master's blueprint. Now he's allowing the temple to crumble, not from neglect, but from honesty. And beneath the rubble, something was always there. The ground itself, solid and real and requiring nothing. The emotional pain of this period is intense, but it's different from before. Before, pain came from feeling inadequate, from failing to live up to some imagined standard. Now pain comes from actually feeling. Grief for the years spent performing. Anger at himself for the pretending. Fear about what happens if he lets go of the identity he's clutched so tightly. Trauma healing, he realizes, isn't about transcending trauma through spiritual bypassing. It's about meeting it directly, without the armor of technique or philosophy. One afternoon, during practice, he breaks down completely. Just stops mid-form, sword lowered, tears coming. Not dramatic, not performative, just real. Zanshin doesn't comfort him, doesn't fix it, doesn't turn it into a teaching moment. The master simply sits nearby, present but not intrusive, and that presence says everything. This is it. This is the work. This rawness is more valuable than 1,000 perfect strikes. Slowly, something shifts. Self-awareness stops being something he's trying to achieve and becomes something he's simply experiencing. Inner stillness isn't a state he maintains. It's what's underneath all the noise when he stops adding to it. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring. It means caring deeply while holding loosely. He begins to understand karma and rebirth not as cosmic mechanics, but as patterns he can observe in his own mind. how each thought births the next, how each action carries forward, how samsara and nirvana aren't places but perspectives. Suffering and awakening aren't sequential, they're concurrent, two sides of the same awareness. When he practices now, there's space in his movements. Room for mistakes, room for discovery, room for Zanshin to be human and flawed and still worthy of respect without worship. The mirror no longer shows him his reflection of limitation. It shows him himself, unfiltered, and that's somehow both more ordinary and more profound than anything he imagined. The rebellion isn't against the master, it's against every idea of what he should be, including the idea of the perfect disciple. Letting go of what you learned is harder than learning it. The disciple sits across from Zanshin one evening, tea between them, silence thick with understanding. Months have passed since the strike that missed, since the collapse, since the rebellion. He's different now, lighter somehow, though he carries the same body, walks the same path. Eastern philosophy has a phrase for this, beginner's mind. But it's not about returning to innocence or pretending ignorance. It's about releasing the weight of accumulated knowing, the burden of being someone who understands. Shadow work revealed what he'd been doing all along, collecting wisdom like armor, building knowledge like walls, using spiritual transformation as another way to hide from the simple, terrifying truth of being human. Now he's learning to unlive those patterns, to metabolize the teachings until they're no longer separate from him, no longer something he carries, but something he is, or isn't. The distinction stops mattering. The psychology of pain teaches that healing isn't linear. It spirals, returns, deepens. The disciple thought there would be a moment of arrival, some clear threshold where emotional pain ended and enlightenment through pain began. But it doesn't work that way. Some days he practices with clarity and presence. Other days he's mechanical, distant, caught in old patterns. The difference now is, he doesn't make it mean something about his worth or progress. Wu Wei, effortless flow, includes the effort, includes the stumbling, includes the days when nothing feels right. Mind-body connection isn't a permanent state. It's a continuous invitation, and sometimes you accept it, sometimes you don't, and both are part of the practice. He stopped trying to master meditation and suffering. Instead, he sits with both, lets them teach him what they will, releases them when they're done. This is detachment, not from feeling, but from the need for feeling to be different than it is. Zanshin watches this transformation, this unlearning, with the quiet recognition of someone who's walked this path before. The master knows the disciple is finally becoming a student, not of technique or philosophy, but of his own experience. One morning during practice, something remarkable happens. They're sparring, and the disciple moves without thinking. Not because he's achieved some transcendent state, but because he's finally stopped getting in his own way. His strikes aren't perfect, but they're honest. His awareness isn't complete, but it's present. And for the first time, he meets Zanshin as an equal, not in skill, not in understanding, but in humanity. Two people, both practicing, both learning, both making mistakes and discovering something in those mistakes. The hierarchy dissolves, not through rebellion, but through maturity. Inner stillness stops being something the master has and the student lacks. It's just stillness, available to anyone willing to stop chasing it. The teachings on impermanence finally land in his bones, not as concept, but as lived reality. He watches his own understanding shift day to day, watches certainty give way to questions, watches answers dissolve back into mystery. Buddhism speaks of non-attachment, and he's learning what that actually means. Not detachment from life, but engagement with life without needing to own it, control it, understand it completely. Taoism describes this as aligning with the natural flow, But he realizes there's nothing to align with because he was never separate from it. The river doesn't try to be a river. The wind doesn't practice being wind. And somewhere in this simple observation, ego dissolution happens, not dramatically, not permanently, but in quiet moments when he forgets to maintain his sense of being someone separate, someone trying. Those moments expand. The gaps between thoughts widen. Self-awareness becomes less about observing himself and more about being the awareness itself, undefined, unlimited, unowned. Years pass. The disciple, though that word no longer quite fits, continues practicing with Zanshin. But the dynamic has changed. Sometimes the student teaches and the master listens. Sometimes they sit in silence, and nobody's the teacher, nobody's the student. The creative void is born here, in this space where titles and roles lose their grip. One day, a new student arrives at the dojo, eager and hungry, eyes bright with the same intensity the disciple once carried. Zanshin introduces them, and the former disciple sees himself reflected in this newcomer. The pride disguised as humility, the hunger for transformation, the belief that enlightenment is something to achieve. He feels compassion for this younger seeker, recognizes the journey ahead, and he knows he can't save them from it, can't shortcut their process, can't give them what they think they want. True learning begins when obedience ends, and they'll have to discover that themselves. The teaching itself, presence after the end, continues in ways that can't be captured in forms or words. Spiritual transformation wasn't a destination. It was the willingness to keep transforming, to keep unlearning, to keep meeting each moment as if for the first time, carrying nothing but awareness and the courage to remain open. Action without intention, gesture without conquest. The disciple has been practicing for what feels like lifetimes now, but time has lost its urgency. There's no deadline for awakening, no race to finish, no final belt to earn. He moves through the dojo differently these days, not because he's mastered anything, but because he's stopped trying to master. Wu Wei, effortless flow, finally makes sense, not as a concept but as lived experience. When he strikes, there's no striker. When he breathes, there's no one claiming ownership of the breath. Eastern philosophy calls this the invisible strike, not because it can't be seen, but because the one doing it has dissolved into the doing itself. Ego dissolution isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's the absence of the internal commentary that used to narrate every movement, every thought, every moment. The mind-body connection stops being a connection and becomes a unity so seamless, you forget there was ever a separation. Zanshin watches this evolution with the kind of recognition that doesn't need words. The master sees his student. No, that word doesn't fit anymore. He sees this person moving through forms with a quality that can't be taught. It can only be discovered through the willingness to abandon everything you thought you knew. Shadow work led here, through all the uncomfortable confrontations with pride, projection, attachment, and identity. The psychology of pain revealed that suffering and awakening aren't sequential. They're simultaneous. You don't heal trauma and then become present. You become present, and in that presence, trauma loses its grip, not because it's resolved, but because you're no longer feeding it with resistance. Mindfulness stops being a practice you do and becomes the ground you stand on. Or rather, there's no ground, no standing, no you, just awareness, moving, breathing, being. One afternoon during practice, something happens that would have seemed impossible years ago. The disciple and Zanshin are sparring, and there's a moment, just a flash, where neither is the teacher and neither is the student. They're just two people moving in response to movement, empty of agenda, flowing without trying to flow. The strikes aren't about winning or demonstrating skill. They're about honesty, about what the moment calls for without the interference of should or shouldn't. Buddhism speaks of non-attachment, and here it is, not detachment from caring, but freedom from needing the outcome to validate you. Taoism describes alignment with the Tao, but there's nothing to align with because separation was always the illusion. The river doesn't try to flow, it just flows. And in this moment, the disciple isn't trying to be like the river. He's just flowing, and the distinction collapses into something too simple to explain. After practice, they sit in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of earlier years when the disciple was desperately trying to appear meditative, while his mind churned with questions and self-evaluation. This is different. A silence that doesn't need to be filled, that isn't waiting for anything, that's complete exactly as it is. Inner stillness isn't something achieved here. It's what remains when you stop creating noise. Meditation and suffering have merged into a single gesture, the willingness to be with what is. The disciple, and even calling him that feels wrong now, like an old costume that no longer fits. He sits there, and there's no one sitting. There's sitting happening, awareness present, but the sense of being someone doing it has evaporated like morning mist. Spiritual transformation wasn't a journey towards something. It was the gradual recognition that you were never separate from what you were seeking. Zanshin speaks, voice barely above a whisper, action without intention, gesture without conquest. It's not a teaching, it's a description of what he's witnessing. The student has become what the master was pointing toward all along, not through imitation but through discovering his own emptiness, his own capacity to move without the weight of self. Detachment and impermanence aren't beliefs anymore. They're visible in the way he holds his teacup, the way he stands, the way he responds without rehearsing the response. There's no enlightenment through pain, because there's no one left to be enlightened. There's just this: awareness manifesting as presence, flowing without effort, striking without a striker. Karma and rebirth continue. Samsara and nirvana dance, but he's no longer caught in the story of them. He's the space in which the story unfolds, and that space is vast enough to hold everything without being defined by anything. The invisible strike isn't a technique. It's what happens when technique dissolves into pure presence, when conquest gives way to response, when ego finally exhausts itself and something clearer remains. The silent vigilance that follows the act. There's a quality that emerges after all the striving stops, after the rebellion completes itself, after even the unlearning has been unlearned. Zanshin, the word itself means alertness, awareness that doesn't waver, presence that continues beyond the moment of action. The disciple who unlearned his master has become the teaching itself, not because he mastered it, but because he stopped being separate from it. Eastern philosophy describes this as the return. You come full circle, back to simplicity, but carrying the depth of everything you've walked through. The dojo looks the same. The practice continues, but nothing is the same, because the one practicing has dissolved into the practice. Self-awareness isn't something he maintains anymore. It's what he is when all the maintaining stops. The psychology of pain no longer operates the way it once did. Emotional pain still arises, grief, fear, frustration, doubt, but there's no longer someone who's failing because they feel these things. Shadow work revealed that the shadow isn't something to eliminate or integrate in some final way. It's a constant companion, part of the full spectrum of being human. Ego dissolution doesn't mean the ego disappears forever. It means you stop believing you are the ego, stop identifying with its needs and fears and endless commentary. When pain comes now, it moves through like weather, acknowledged, felt, released. Not bypassed through spiritual techniques or managed through meditation strategies. Just met, honestly, without the need for it to mean something about worthiness or progress. suffering and awakening dance together, and he's learned to let them both be without choosing sides. Time passes, though time feels different now, less like a line moving toward something, and more like a field in which things arise and dissolve. New students come to the dojo, eager and hungry, carrying the same intensity the disciple once wore like armor. He sees himself in them, the pride disguised as devotion, the hunger for transformation, the belief that enlightenment is somewhere ahead if they just work hard enough. And he feels nothing but compassion, because he knows what they don't yet. The path they're on is perfect, and it will break them in exactly the ways they need to be broken. Wu Wei, effortless flow, can't be taught. It can only be discovered through the exhaustion of trying. Mind-body connection can't be forced. It emerges when you finally stop forcing. He doesn't try to save them from their journey. He just shows up, practices alongside them, and occasionally offers a word or gesture that might plant a seed they won't understand until years later. One day, a young student asks him, "How do I know when I've truly learned?" And he smiles, not with superiority but with recognition, because he remembers asking Zanshin the same question in different words 1,000 times. "You stop asking," he says simply. It's not a clever answer, it's the truth. Mindfulness stops being something you practice when you realize you've never not been aware. You were just aware of the wrong things. Detachment stops being a goal when you realize you were never truly attached to anything. You were attached to your story about the things. Impermanence stops being a teaching when you see it in real time, in your own thoughts arising and dissolving, in your own identity shifting moment to moment. Buddhism and Taoism aren't philosophies to study anymore. They're descriptions of what's already happening, maps of territory he's standing in right now. Zanshin grows older, as all masters do. The body ages, moves slower, carries the accumulated weight of decades of practice. But the presence, that hasn't diminished. If anything, it's become more transparent, more obvious, less cluttered by the need to demonstrate or maintain anything. The disciple who unlearned his master has become the teaching itself. One evening, sitting together as they've done countless times, Zanshin speaks. The silent vigilance that follows the act. That's Zanshin, not the strike. What remains after the strike. Not the meditation. What's present when you stop meditating. Not the achievement. What you are when achievement no longer matters. The words settle like snow. And in that settling, the student understands. He hasn't become Zanshin. Zanshin was always what remained when everything else dissolved. Inner stillness, non-attachment, spiritual transformation, trauma healing, ego dissolution. All these terms pointing at the same simple truth. You were never broken. You were never incomplete. You were never separate from what you sought. The journey was necessary, not to arrive somewhere, but to exhaust the belief that you needed to arrive. Karma and rebirth, samsara and nirvana. These continue, but he's no longer caught in them. He's the awareness in which they play out, vast and still and completely ordinary. The teaching itself becomes presence after the end, not the end of life, but the end of seeking, the end of the story of the one who seeks. And in that ending, everything truly begins. The disciple who truly understands his master is the one who learns to disobey him, not with arrogance, not with rebellion for rebellion's sake, but with the quiet courage to stop performing enlightenment and start living it. Zanshin didn't need another perfect student. He needed someone willing to be imperfect, present, and real. And that's what the disciple finally became when he stopped trying to become anything at all. You've walked this path with him, from the illusion of knowing to the mirror of projection, from the cage of repetition to the strike that revealed everything, from sacred rebellion to the unlearning that set him free. Each step wasn't about gaining something new. It was about releasing what was always in the way. Shadow work, ego dissolution, spiritual transformation. These aren't destinations. They're the continuous practice of meeting yourself without the armor of technique or philosophy. So here's the question that matters. Are you still bowing to teachings, or are you embodying them? Are you collecting wisdom like trophies, or are you allowing it to dissolve into your bones? Do you carry your practice like weight, or does it move through you like breath? The master doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be awake. And awakening doesn't look like you thought it would. It's messier, more human, less about transcending and more about descending into your body, into this moment, into the rawness of being alive without needing it to mean something. If this resonated with something inside you, if you felt the weight of your own perfect discipline, or recognized yourself in the disciple's struggle, then you're ready for what comes next. Because understanding how to unlearn your master begins with understanding how discipline itself can become your prison. Watch the previous teaching. The discipline that destroys you is the same one that sets you free. It reveals the paradox at the heart of all practice. How the very thing meant to liberate you can become the cage you mistake for safety. Together, these teachings complete each other. One shows the trap, the other shows the way out. Keep walking. The next lesson awaits you.